Hello, and welcome back to All Angles with Allie, the ironically named podcast where I don't plan on giving you all angles. I just plan on giving you mine. I am a Christian Canadian lowercase c conservative. I want to be like your sassy, opinionated friend that's helping to break down what's going on in the Canadian political landscape. And let me tell you, there is so much. There is so much that today's topic is something that I'm even late to the party on. I knew about it, but I didn't really grasp the scope of it until I was listening to Matt Taibbi, an American reporter, on his Substack and podcast this week. I'd highly recommend it. I actually really like it. It's called America This Week, but they always talk about things I find super interesting. I even pay to listen to America This Week. But he broke down what's happening in this Online Harms Act, this Bill C-63 in Canada, to raise the alarms of just how crazy, how dystopian. I know we've heard that word a lot, but truly dystopian, truly wild this bill is, and how little pickup it is truly getting in Canada. And as I said, for myself as well, like, it's just so exhausting. The constant scandals, the constant bad news, everything is falling apart in Canada, but they are counting on that in order to put things like this through. And this, guys, I want to say it up front. I'm not trying to add to the fear mongering, but this will drastically change how you relate to every person. This will drastically change what you think. It is that deep. It is that draconian. It is, out of all the scary, horrific bills we have seen in the last 9 years, this is the top. So I need you to pay attention. I need you to grasp some of these things. I need you to share. And so that's a good segue. Personally, would you please subscribe here on YouTube, whatever podcast service you use, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast, please subscribe. Please like and review. You know, it helps so much. I'm just getting started. There's a gap for me to fill that I believe will resonate with people, and it would mean a lot if you would share and pass it on. So, Online Harms Act, Bill C-63. This came out in February. Let's start with what Justin himself, the Prime Minister of Canada, has to say about this bill.
We've spent years working with different community groups, with advocates, with minority communities, with experts, with people in all sorts of different backgrounds to make sure that what we're doing is actually protecting kids. And I look forward to putting forward that online harms bill, which people will see is very, very specifically focused on protecting kids and not on censoring the internet as misinformation and as the right wing tends to try and characterize it as. I think everyone, wherever they are on the political spectrum, can agree that protecting kids is something governments should be focused on.
Isn't that nice? Isn't that so nice? He just wants to protect kids, guys. That's all this is about. And anything else you hear about it is just misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, whatever we're calling it now. He's lying. He's lying. And lucky for us, there are people out there who are not mainstream who are talking about exactly what this bill is. It is 100 pages, 100-page bill. That immediately is a red flag. If your bill is that long, you know they've shoved stuff in there that should not be in there. And the way that he has the audacity to say this is about protecting kids when it is so far away from that. To start off, how can they even say this is about protecting children? What does that even mean? Well, let's head to the news release here that was released February 26, 2024. The digital world can pose significant risks. Social media can be used to sexually exploit children, promote self-harm to children, incite violence, put people's safety at risk, and foment hate. Online harms have real-world impact with tragic, even fatal consequences. Okay, that's true. What are you going to do about it? That day, the Honorable Arif Virani, Minister of Justice and AG of Canada, introduced Bill C-63, the Online Harms Bill. The bill would create stronger online protection for children and better safeguard everyone in Canada from online hate and other types of harmful content. The bill sets out a new vision for safer and more inclusive online participation. It would hold online platforms, including live streaming and adult content services, accountable for the design choices made that lead to the dissemination and amplification of harmful content on their platforms, and ensure that platforms are employing mitigation strategies that reduce the user's exposure to harmful content. All right, let's head down to the bullets. The bill would do this by creating and implementing a new legislative and regulatory framework through a new Online Harms Act. This framework would mandate online platforms, including live streaming and other user-uploaded adult content services, i.e. Pornhub, to adopt measures that reduce the risk of harm in 7 specific categories of harmful content. The Online Harms Act would also require services to remove content that sexually victimizes a child or re-victimizes a survivor. Good. And 2 is intimate content posted without consent. So remove intimate content posted without consent. Non-compliance could lead to strict penalties. I agree with that. That would be great. You know what? You've had years to go after Pornhub, which is headquartered in Montreal, and you haven't. But are we supposed to see this now as you are? Interesting. Okay. At first glance, that sounds good. I don't want children to be exploited on the internet or to have survivors re-victimized. So the bill would require through the new Online Harms Act that services provide clear and accessible ways to flag harmful content and block users, implement safety measures tailored for children, and implement other measures to reduce exposure to 7 categories of harmful content. Notice they keep saying that, including content that involves bullying children or promotes self-harm. Oh, like transgenderism, the social contagion? Will that be included in promoting self-harm? Like promoting the cutting off of healthy breasts or healthy penises? Will that also be included in, the takedown of self-harm promotion? Asking for a friend. The bill would create stronger laws to help protect all people in Canada from hatred on and offline. On and offline. Okay. By creating a definition of hatred in the criminal code, which already exists. Okay. Increasing penalties for existing hate propaganda offenses, creating a standalone hate crime offense, and creating an additional set of remedies for online hate speech in the Canadian Human Rights Act. Now let's pause here for a second because I don't want to forget this thought. There already is a legal and criminal definition of hatred and of hate speech. And this is a side story, but there is currently at the Ontario Court of Appeals a appeal going forward with a guy named Bill Watcott. Now, I'm not supporting what Bill did, but at the same time, I think this is a really important case study. Bill went out several years ago to the Pride Parade and he handed out fake condom packages that inside had a brochure that said a lot of things that I wouldn't support, but that was saying that gay sex is unhealthy. Originally, the charges that were brought against him were dropped, and the Crown, as in the government, has since appealed it to try to say that what Bill Watcott was doing by saying that gay sex is unhealthy was promoting the eradication of gay men. So by coming out and saying this lifestyle is unhealthy, and yes, he said other things, so I'm not defending everything that was said. I'm uncomfortable with the way that he presented it, but at the same time, I do think it is important to be able to say to somebody, I think that your lifestyle is unhealthy. There are risks involved with your lifestyle. That's important to be able to say. That's actually a potentially loving thing to be able to say. And now the Crown has appealed it based on trying to convolute that message actually is calling for the eradication of a people group. Just contemplate it. Just contemplate that story, okay? Just do some mental work on it. Returning again to the news release, the bill would enhance the act respecting the mandatory reporting of internet child pornography by persons who provide an internet service to better protect young people. Sure, also good. And the act would establish a new digital safety commission to oversee and enforce the Online Harms Act, aka we want to hire more bureaucrats. the regulatory framework, and a new digital safety ombudsman. More jobs, more high-paying jobs for people who can work in this communist government to act as a resource and advocate for the public interest with respect to systemic issues related to online safety. Yes, I did interject there a few times, but just want to highlight that they will be hiring, because the government already is the largest employer in this country. And that's a way to ensure economic thriving, is to make sure that the majority of people are hired by the government, as in you and I pay those salaries, right? The government doesn't have any of its own money. Just want to make sure that that is clear. So most of those things sound good, good. We're protecting children. Here's the thing, guys. Here is the thing, that most of those things about protecting children online and ensuring that there is, no bullying, those things are already covered under other laws. And where I become skeptical is, the government sure moved fast when they wanted to get out their propaganda about jabberinos or about lockdowns and such. So if they really wanted to clear the internet of harms to children and victims, they could. They already could. We know that they have the mechanisms to shut these things down, and they just don't use them. So instead, they've written a 100-page bill that sounds all good. It sounds lovely. Everyone will be protected on and offline. But that's not the case. So let's get into what they're not saying at the beginning of that news release. And for this, I'm going to take us over to Matt Taibbi's Substack. And I pay for this. I think it is worth a follow. I really enjoy his writing and his podcast. I'm going to play his intro video to his own article. It's a 1-minute snapshot of what he's going to write about, and then we'll get into some of the points that he raises.
We Americans have always picked on Canada. We consider it sort of our birthright. Now they may be getting the last laugh on us. Our northern neighbors have drafted a bill called the Online Harms Act, also called C-63, that's making its way toward law. If passed, it will not only outlaw hate speech, it will give the government the power to go back in time and punish past statements that are still on the internet. For most cases, you'd be judged by an administrative panel, not a real court bound by rules of evidence, and they can fine you up to $50,000. Other cases carry extraordinary penalties. Advocating genocide, for instance, can earn from 5 years to life in prison. Think about what that might mean in the current context. Why should you care? In the Twitter files, we found evidence that American officials want to adopt frameworks that are more in line with foreign hate speech codes. That means there are people here who want this, or something like this. Blame Canada, shame on Canada.
I thought that was a good little snapshot to get into what is actually happening in this bill and what people are starting to expose more and more. Of course, there were the people at the beginning like Ezra Levant of Rebel News and other people on Twitter who were talking about this bill. But I think with all the scandals going on, it kind of fell down by the wayside. And now that some American journalists are starting to talk about this, and he even says this himself, Matt Taibbi says this in his podcast, that somebody said to him, hey, have you really clued in on this Canadian bill? And he went and talked to multiple Canadian lawyers who went through the bill and dissected it and talked about what is actually going on here. So I'm going to make my way through Matt Taibbi's article because I think he's broken it down in a simple enough way. And especially as somebody outside of Canada, I feel like that almost makes it easier for us inside Canada who are relatively apathetic about everything to, and I say that to be cheeky because the whole point of this podcast is to help civic engagement and help people to be more engaged and understand what's going on. But I think he does a good job of breaking down some of the bullet points. But here's the TLDR. What this bill could do is could punish you for things that you have already said, things that you might say. It incentivizes people to rat each other out with the reward of $20,000 should the person that you rat out be prosecuted, be convicted. You can get $20,000 per complaint. They are anonymous complaints. You, if you are convicted, can pay up to $50,000, have life in prison. You don't have to actually say anything. It's if people think you might say something, if they have reason to believe that you might say something that is hateful or that could lead to, not lead to genocide, but like foment hatred or, be offensive. Like these days, they call the G word on almost everything. Like almost everything. It's like that word hardly means anything anymore, which is tragic because it actually really matters. Basically, if people think that you are somehow a danger to society, whatever that means in the moment, then you could be put under house arrest. You could be forced to give up your legally obtained firearms, to cease drinking or drugs, which, I'm for those last things, I guess. This is so dystopian, so dark. And what Walter Kern and Matt Taibbi end up talking about in their podcast together is how this could radically change the way people have relationships. They're harking back to East Germany when spouses ratted each other out, children ratted out parents. I mean, I talk on the internet all the time. 100% I'm getting informed. Like the bill even uses the language of informants. It's so dark. And we have other countries in the world that have already implemented similar hate speech laws, i.e., Australia. Scotland just put one in place that is meant to also criminalize speech against transgenderism. So the reason why I bring up that Bill Walcott case with the appeal at the Ontario Court of Appeals is that we are talking about a constantly changing definition of hate speech. We are talking about a world that is so into lying about us. Like I often talk against transgenderism, and it's not because I don't believe that that is a genuine experience for some people. I'm just highly skeptical of the amount of young people in particular. I'm highly skeptical of the way that we have now glorified, celebrated autogynephilia, which has been a mental illness for decades, hundreds of years. The way that we are celebrating the mutilation of teenagers that can't even go on field trips without their parents' consent, but they can cut off healthy body parts. They can sterilize their bodies before they even have a fully formed frontal lobe. These things need to be allowed to be said. And I will not be erasing my digital footprint, because if you know me, you already could be complaining about me. And while we're on this, so much of what is happening in our world hinges on the idea of convenience. And I am really struck by how docile we've become, that we're always looking for like the lowest, easiest thing to do. And I'm challenged by that because I have those tendencies too. But I think what it is a lack of vision. And as it says in the Bible, where there is no vision, the people perish. And ironically, that very scripture is on the Peace Tower located at Parliament in Ottawa. There are three main scriptures, and one of them is where there is no vision, the people perish. And I think that with bills like this and so many others, that we just become like, oh, I can't be bothered. I'm tired. There's too much going on. It's like we have no vision for the future. Like, I just need the easiest, most convenient, just entertain me. I want to be numb to the world around me. I can't take anything more in. And then these things pop up and people don't have the capacity to fight it. And honestly, I understand, but it's not going to go away. You need to be thinking about the generations. What is convenient to you now is not going to be a net good for your children and your grandchildren and the future generations. What is easiest now is not going to produce great things for them. Okay, what seems like the lowest bar, the easiest thing right now, is going to yield destruction in the future. So please have a vision, not just for your own personal life, your own little family, but please have a vision for the nation that God has put you in for this time in history. It's not a mistake that you are here, that you live here, that you were born here, that you moved here, whatever it is. Please have vision for what the future of this country looks like and what the future for Canadians look like. Please, I beg you. And I think this is such a crazy bill that has the ability to irreversibly change the way that we interact with one another, the way that we think, the way that we choose to do things, the way that we'll spend money. I can't imagine like I am a very single woman. How do I date if I live in a world where if you say the wrong thing or somebody thinks you might say the wrong thing, that they could rat you out and be rewarded $20,000? How do you have friendships when they might turn on you, or maybe their financial situation changes and they get desperate enough, which I mean, have you heard lately? Canada's not doing great financially. Canadians aren't doing well financially. You want an extra $20,000? Rat out your brother. Rat out your friend. Rat out your colleague. Rat out your child or your parent or your teacher. It's happened in history not long ago. I always say my dad was born in 1942. Anne Frank was alive and in the attic in Amsterdam. It is like this picture of time that we have allowed ourselves, despite having more information than at any time in the history of the world that we have access to, we seem to not know anything. And less than 100 years ago, this exact thing was happening in Europe, where people were incentivized to rat out, to betray their neighbors, people that they loved, for money and for some kind of ideology. Don't let it happen. Getting into some of these points, this is again from Matt Taibbi's article last week. He says Trudeau was lying when he said C63 was very, very specifically focused on correcting kids. The purview of the Online Harms Act extends far beyond speech, reimagining society as a mandated social engineering project, creating transformational new procedures that would, 1, enlist Canada's citizens in an ambitious social monitoring system with rewards of up to $20,000 for anonymous informants of hateful behavior, with the guilty paying penalties up to $50,000, creating a self-funded national spying system. It would introduce extraordinary criminal penalties, including life in prison, not just for existing crimes like advocating genocide, something that is already protected and illegal, like it's covered in other bills, but for any offense that is motivated by hatred. In theory, any non-criminal offense, as tiny as littering, committed with hateful intent. It would punish Minority Report pre-crime, where if an informant convinces a judge you will commit a hate offense, you can be jailed up to a year, put under house arrest, have firearms seized, or be forced into drug alcohol testing, all for things that you haven't done. It would penalize past statements. The law gets around prohibitions against retroactive punishment by calling the offense continuous communication of hate, i.e., the crime is your failure to take down bad speech. And it would force internet platforms to remove harmful content virtually on demand. It has to be done within 24 hours, according to this bill. The hammer being fines of up to 6% of that platform's gross global revenue. You think that Facebook is going to fight the Canadian government when they are told that they could be fined up to 6% of their gross global revenue? No. They're going to hire hundreds, if not thousands, of people to make sure they can respond to the complaints that are going to be flying at them as people seek to get their payout for ratting out neighbors for what they may say. You think we're all just going to form some kind of coalition? We're going to say, love your neighbor, and we're not going to rat each other out because we don't want to exploit one another in such a way. Guys, this is already the scheme of the left. They are using our professional colleges to anonymously complain, potentially not even as Canadian citizens or residents. They are using professional colleges to shut down dissenters, i.e. Jordan Peterson, that had, 3 anonymous complaints made against him from people who are not his patients. And his professional college, despite his own record and decades of working as a psychologist in Ontario, he is being sent to a re-education camp. He has to learn how to use the internet responsibly. Speaking of Jordan Peterson, back in February, him and Ezra Levant were going back and forth on X about this bill, and Ezra Levant broke down some of the highlights. And I think it's worth reading because he writes in such a way that's a bit easier to understand. I'll link this tweet in the description as well so you can read the thread. So, for years, the Canadian Human Rights Act has banned discrimination against people based on gender identity or expression. You, of course, have never discriminated against anyone. He's responding to Dr. Peterson. But this new bill adds Section 13 to that Canadian Human Rights Act, which now says that mere speech is considered discrimination if it is likely to foment detestation or vilification of an individual or group. So now if someone watches one of your YouTube videos or reads on your tweets about, say, transgender athletes changing in girls' change rooms, and as a result is likely to have hard feelings towards trans people, that is hate speech. That's step one. Here's step two. Any member of the public, including non-citizens, can lodge a complaint against you to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, an activist, quasi-judicial tribunal run by non-judges appointed by Trudeau. This is very important because this is not a legitimate judicial system. This is, as he said, quasi-judicial. It's not held to the same standards as an actual law court or trial. I'm sorry, I get confused with my legal terms, but this is not like before lawyers or judges. This is an appointed tribunal. They can get up to $20,000 per complaint from you, and they don't have to be the victim. There doesn't have to be a victim at all. Remember, it's a future crime. They only have to show that your tweet or video is likely to or might cause one person to have hard feelings about another person or a group. $20,000 that you'd pay the complainant plus $50,000 in fines to the government per complaint. So there could be a new complaint for every tweet you make, every video, and the complainants can be professional busybodies and activists. They don't have to actually be the victim. They don't actually have to be harmed or affected by your words or what you might say. Why wouldn't woke activists or anyone really literally file a CHRA complaint after every single thing you do or say on social media? It's free. There's no limit. There's no recourse. I'm adding some words in here. Even if you win, you lose. The process is the punishment. And of course, they're going to win. This will become an industry to enrich woke grifters and destroy you financially. And again, this is, I'm adding here, taking away from the tweet, but this has already been happening. We have seen so much lawfare in Canada. I worked for the Justice Center. We were supporting many different cases of people who were being absolutely humiliated and defamed in the public because of standing up for very basic objective truths, like why does a elementary school need to have a book that diminishes the significance of sterilizing one's body as a child, and being asked I believe they were 11 in this particular book, who they want to have sex with. That should be an objective truth worth protecting, but instead, that teacher who brought this concern up, Carolyn Berjowski, was called a transphobe because that is, the easiest word to just tack onto anything, along with being called a racist. And she was humiliated out of a job, forced to resign, and has been going through legal nonsense ever since. They're already doing this. That's just one example. Returning to Ezra Levant's tweet, he said, but here's the truly amazing part. The complainants can keep their identity secret from you. Secret testimony from secret witnesses, which would never be allowed in an actual court. And they can get paid $20,000 to take a run at you. That's how they're going to come for you. And he includes sources and screenshots there. And I will put that link in the bio if you want to have a look at that again. So I think I'll leave that there for now. I just wanted this to be a crash course on some of the concerns of the entirely concerning Online Harms Act. You are being lied to. You need to bring this up at every conversation, every dinner that you are at, and let people know what is happening and what's the recourse? Honestly, I don't know, but we have to try something. Please write your MPs and say that you are vehemently against this bill. Encourage them to vote against it. If you are in a conservative riding, then ask them to play the opposition and start to make a stink about this, because it is at first reading, which means it does have a little bit more of a ways to progress, but this should be shut down immediately. And as I've already said many times, there is so much going on in our Canadian federal government. There's the Arrive scam. There is the drug recriminalization in BC that's been a total gong show. There is just constant nonsense. And so I bet most people are pretty overwhelmed, but we do need to really raise the stink. And I am considering helping to organize a letter writing campaign. So if that's something that interests you, please write to me, and that will help light a fire under my butt to get that going. And then we can, pool our resources and our influence, and we can get those letters out to MPs across the country. Anyways, that's all for now. Please like, subscribe, share, comment, all the things. It makes a big difference, especially as I'm just getting started. I appreciate you being here, and I hope this was helpful. Would always love to hear from you. You can find me on Instagram at Allie Spencer Pod, as well as YouTube, and you can follow, subscribe anywhere you listen to your podcasts. I'm also on Substack, starting to write there, also at Allie Spencer Pod. So please hit me up. Send me messages. Tell me what you like, don't like. If there's any topics you want covered, that's always helpful to know. What do you have questions about? What could I get into? What do you want to hear? And I will see you in the next episode. Thanks, guys.